The next two lectures are filled with architectural examples and a lot of written information about the process of doing indigenous architecture, which I'm sure you're all interested in if you're taking this course. Now, I'm going to show you something that expresses the true Row Wampum, but is in architecture of the last century. This is a figure on the face of the Buell Planetarium in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It says at the bottom, it's an Art Deco sculpture, it says primitive science. Primitive science. I'm calling this indigenous science. There's Western science, there's indigenous science. There's primitive science, and there's Western science. These two are the two row in the most profound level. And it's a dichotomy which has been recognized down through the years from time to time. And this is one of those incredible times. This is the Buell Planetarium under construction, and it faces an incredible but very simple park with a circle in the middle and diagonal walkways facing the four directions, north, south, east, west, but rendered as an Art Deco Beaux-Arts building and party. Would you think that this is the respectful expression of two-row architecture? Here is the door. It's a plain wall of stone. The Buell Planetarium and the Institute of Popular Science. There are two figures over the door. One is the figure I just showed you, primitive science. The other says modern science. And they sit there in that huge elevation, two simple figures, one and the other, representing the two row. Now, the two row wasn't conversation in Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania because that's part of the original Iroquoian territory. And this artist, as these Art Deco artists are wont to do, have a profound understanding when they are commissioned to do sculpture. They're not told what to do. They often choose their own subject and their own way of expressing it. And here we have it, separated by a beautiful reference to the Doric column, rendered in the most stripped-down way. The figures rest against beautiful black granite. The rest of the building is limestone. Absolutely stunning. That's just a reminder now of the relationships that we're going to review. The architecture of ethnology. Now, ethnology is not a very old study. It's perhaps 150 years old. It is the study of what we'll call primitive cultures, for lack of a better word. Ethnology. It's not used today because it came to symbolize a kind of racism, but I like it because it doesn't get confused with archaeology and anthropology, which is what they call it today. But these anthropologists and archaeologists are the worst form of colonizers in many ways because they study other cultures as an exotic other that they turn into a study which builds an academic career. And it's an abuse of privilege in many, many ways. And our world is filled with these people. And I've worked with them too in kind of a happy relationship where we share knowledge. But I've been put down many times by academics. And it hurts me, and they really do not care because they have their papers in the academy and they're published, and that gives this tremendous power to them. Whereas the paper I presented to you in 2 lectures ago, where I did an indigenous interpretation of the Myers Road Longhouse site, It was not credited, even though I submitted it to the Archaeological Journal. They could give it any credibility, and they wouldn't publish it. Fine. I call it the persistent pursuit of the survival of indigenous Iroquoian history, culture, and knowledge. It has gone down through time ever since we met the colonizer. We are presenting our culture in a way that will help it to survive. So we work with ethnology. We work with anthropologists. We work with all the people who have studied our culture since 150 years ago, when it became a very important study, the Iroquoian history. The Iroquoians, if you want to know, are the most studied native culture in the world. That tells you something. It's powerful, the Iroquoian history and culture, and you've been learning it. And now you know what it is, and now you can actually embrace it, because you can talk about it with intelligence and authority. Jacques Cartier, of course. It all began in Canada with Jacques Cartier, 1635. A well-meaning Frenchman. Think of Quebec City, Strathcona, Hochelaga. He was in Montreal for all of 6 or 8 hours, saw Mount Royal, and went back home to Strathcona. But he recorded the visit, and he recorded what he saw there, the Iroquoian longhouses. This was his journey. He comes down through the north into the beautiful Gulf of the St. Lawrence. So beautiful. Of the north shore is are all cliffs and with woods. Just stunning. And he's going by the north tip of Newfoundland, and then he's coming into the great St. Lawrence, and there is Strathcona and Hochelaga. This is his second voyage to the New World, 1535, 1536. Here is the drawing he prepared, his Jesuit ethnologist prepared as a description of our village, which I've very inaccurate but very beautiful drawing. And then they created a diary called the Jesuit Relations, a huge, huge document, all in French, recording the visits of Cartier in great detail, now housed in the archives in Paris and really never looked at by English Canadians, unfortunately. Now, the other great explorer is Samuel Champlain. And here we have Champlain in a sculpture in Ottawa at the conjunction between Ottawa and Gatineau, where the National Gallery of Canada is. This is on the grounds of it. At the base of that sculpture are 2 indigent Indians being blessed by a Jesuit priest. Let me tell you that this was removed 2 years ago as being absolutely offensive. It's now in storage at the National Gallery as just an artifact. It was removed. So those sculptural removals, they're not new. They didn't just happen yesterday, as we hear, or the day before, or last week. They've been happening over the last generation. Now, this is a sketch of the first encounter with Iroquoian people by, not Cartier, but Champlain, at the head of the beautiful Lake George. And what it was a meeting we recorded. We came to Cartier's men with arrows, bows and arrows. That's all we had. They came, they had weapons, guns, basically. And when we met, we put some of our elders forward and offered to do them the At the Wood's Edge condolence ceremony of welcome. They responded with gunfire. We responded with a rain of arrows. which became for them a symbolism of our aggressive, brutal ways when they're the aggressors. And this is our land, and they're treating it as if it's a strange land with a bunch of primitives in it. That's a very famous sketch, by the way. And then here we see the map that his men produced at that time, and you can see in the lower left-hand corner, there are sketches of what we look like. Half naked, actually naked to nature, and living a peaceful life. They have our food there at the bottom and other artifacts. There are pictures of animals and different types of fish around the perimeter. Their tall ship is right in the middle of the lake, and that lake is Ontario. That's how they saw it, a place of tall ships. And we had tall ships in Ontario right through the War of 1812. Some of them are sunken in the harbor at Toronto. They used those ships for several hundred years. Now, the conversation switches back to this castle in northern England, Alnwick Castle, the home of the Percy family, the Dukes of Northumberland. And in these ramparts, there are walls around it. There are hallways and rooms, and off to the left is a section of the rampart that holds the very first archaeological museum in the world. And it's certainly the first in England as well. And what is in that museum? Artifacts from Iroquois, because Hugh Percy had come on a visit to Iroquois. He loved the Mohawks. They gave him gifts. He had tomahawks, and he had different types of stone tools, and of course projectile points, arrowheads. And he has a lovely portrait of Joseph Brant in that room. It's sort of semi-lit. It's kind of a dark room. It's not visited by many people. But when I went to visit, they made sure that I went. Because your ancestors are represented here, Bill. And it's a friendship. And it's still alive. You're here. We're here. That's how the British say it. And I go, whoa, wow. I called it from Iroquois to the north of England. And there is a connection. And it is archaeology. And it's respectful two-row conversations. And they're still alive today. I visited here 15 years ago, and it was alive as the moment it happened. I was shocked. And this is a very famous, the library of the Percy family in the castle. It's a very famous library in England because it's a two-story room. And it contains bound volumes that are ancient, including volumes that our people produced and that the Duke in his wisdom collected. And they're here in safekeeping. In fact, we go here to do research. I went here myself to see if I could see some of these ancient volumes. They were very kind to me, but the library was in the process of being cataloged, which it had never been. And guess who was doing the cataloging? A lovely girl from Calgary, Alberta. She had married an Englishman, and he worked here at the castle, and they hired her as their archivist. So I was in this strange world. It's in two worlds. It's Iroquois, it's Ontario, it's north of England. And the thing is about this room is that it's furnished like someone's living room. There's a television at one end, and this is the room where the family comes and sits together. And yet it's so grand. But it's also homey at the same time. And on the end tables, you saw pictures of the royal family, Her Majesty and other members of her family, because these people are very close friends with Elizabeth, and she comes to stay here. She loves it. She loves the north of England. She loves Scotland. Now, next comes another Englishman who has a tremendous impact here in North America. This is Robert Smithson. He was born of what they call a love child. He was born out of wedlock. And his father was quite wealthy, but he distanced himself from Robert. And Robert never married. And out of spite to his family, if you can believe it, he decided to leave his entire fortune to the United States of America to found a museum of ethnology. Guess what it is? From his name, Smithsonian. The Smithsonian is founded by an Englishman who never set foot in North America. But you can bet that he knew Hugh Percy. And you can bet he knew what he was doing when he founded the Smithsonian. And there it is on the mall in Washington. You see it at the bottom of the picture. It's a long building that's unlike any of the others. It's in the British Tudor arts and crafts style, and it's in a red stone. All the rest of the buildings are white marble and columns and whatever, and then you have this funky little building relative to the others, the Smithsonian. And this forms the heart now of one of the world's great museums. It's the largest museum of ethnology in the world. There's what it looked like when the building was just finished. A real oddball on the Washington Mall. When you go there, you come to this building and you go, what? I mean, I do, because I love the neoclassic Washington, but this is not it. And there is no other building on the Washington Mall like this. And this is one of the galleries inside. This is the gallery that housed artifacts from Iroquois. A terrible, tragic fire took place in here in about 1880 and burnt almost everything. It's like the fire at Windsor Castle, only nothing was retrieved in this fire, and we lost a lot of our recorded knowledge. But the Iroquois weren't upset about it because, as my chief said, we don't have museums. We have living artifacts, and when we're through with them, we either give them away or bury them. We don't put them in museums. But here's the museum. And the thing about the Smithsonian, they went about in the late 19th century recording Native people. This is the first recording of Thomas Edison. They were Native people speaking Native tongues, and then they would record them in books. It's remarkable. I have some of them. They tell some of our great stories in their periodical. Then, at the same time, you have this, the Great White Way, the 1893 World's Fair. And this was the most spectacular World's Fair ever produced before or since. And why? They invited someone from every single country on the planet to come here and to do a display and to show their culture. And of course that included Native people. They wanted Native people to come and do their stomp dances for everybody. And everyone was very happy to come, but it was a great feat of colonization. And at the end of the pool in the middle, it's called the Columbian Exhibition for Christopher Columbus. And Columbus's statue is at the far end, and here you have at the front end a beautiful gold sculpture of America, done by Daniel Chester French. He was given free rein to produce an heroic sculpture of absolutely sublime ancient Grecian beauty, holding up the orb of conquest. And there's an eagle on top of the orb. It's very powerful. That sculpture did not survive the fair. It was destroyed. Most of the buildings were done in plaster, and the sculpture was done in zinc, I believe. A very soft metal, very easy to work with, but doesn't have a long life. They did a 3/4 reproduction of this, and it's now in a park in Chicago, Illinois. This is a fair which Frank Lloyd Wright said, put architecture back 100 years. And you know, he was right, because people went back home, they saw this. They had no neoclassical buildings in their towns, but they started what's called the City Beautiful movement. And everyone built neoclassical buildings in their towns as the principal buildings, whether it was the town hall or the library or a museum or government offices or courthouses. They were all done in the Grecian style, and you'll see them littered throughout the U.S. We have a few remnants here in Galt of that fair. You can see it in the buildings. Certain of the buildings, not quite as blatant as some places, but it's here. This fair, if it was done today, would probably, in our present state of mind, cause a riot. But it was visited by something like 16 million people in 1893. And it wasn't like people could fly here. It was a great journey for a lot of people to come. And it was the thing to do in the summer of 1893. It was a bit like our Expo 67, an absolutely seminal World's Fair that changed people's lives forever. And Expo 67 did that for not only Canada, but the world. There are no meaningful World's Fairs left, because the whole notion of gathering together and sharing culture, although you'd think that it would be popular, it's not popular. People have tried to have a World's Fair in various places. The last was in Japan. It was a total failure. They had one in Atlanta at a certain point. Didn't take off. But here, just to show you the nature of colonization that honors and also puts us down. At the fair, this sculpture at the left is an Indian on a horse looking out, not defeated, but surveying his territory. And this is what people wanted to see. So who did they think the native people were, if they thought this was a beautiful, heroic pose? I don't know. Some people did care about native people, and one of them, very surprisingly, and I'll show you why, Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright's work was an absolute act of atonement for the conquest of native people. But it's not viewed that way because of the way scholars and historians try to tell the work of an architecture. They warp it to their own means. Wright is very hard to warp if you look carefully, and I'm going to look at some things with you just for a few minutes just to show you the power of that man. And here is a portrait taken at the fair. You know, they had backdrops and they got people to bring their most colorful clothes so they could be photographed. And we have thousands of photographs from that fair. Among them was this man, Edward Curtis. And Edward Curtis took it upon himself as a life mission to go into the American West and photograph all the native people that he met. And he was a wonderful photographer. And he went alone. He had very fine photographic equipment and took some of the most stunning photographs of native people ever produced. They're very valuable today. This is one of his photographs. They really capture the true life. Here we see native people in their teepees and on their horses in their village. This is remarkable. People didn't see this. By the way, he was working with the Smithsonian and gave his work to the Smithsonian. Another sculpture. Just to show you, this is called The Coming of the White Man in Portland, Oregon. And you see the native people, the wonder they have in their eyes. And you see on the base of the sculpture, Coming of the White Man. What is that supposed to say? That is not about a defeated native nation. It's about an heroic people observing the influx of settlers and refugees that are not like them. This is an incredible moment, and somebody has done a sculpture. I don't know the sculptor here. We await the white man to bring his message of love to us. Whoa! Well, you see, you know what that is, Christianity. The path and the woods. That's the path we share. 2 row, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, not one behind the other. Now we come to this. This is another sublime moment for Iroquoian ethnology. And of all places, it's in one of the finest art schools in the United States, if not the world, the Cranbrook Academy. Now this is an aerial view of the art museum facing a beautiful pond with sculptures by Carl Millis. I just show you the setting here because this is out in front of the art museum, this great heroic portico done around 1935 with beautiful sculptures done by the Swedish sculptor Carl Millis of yearning figures. These figures are like, they're terrified actually. It's the European race terrified by itself. That's how I see that sculpture. I saw it all throughout my boyhood. My mother loved it. She would bring us here on weekends. And I was fascinated because the sculptures were all naked. And you know, Americans have a real problem with nudity. And you don't see it very often. But here, it's in all of its glory, and it's innocent. It's not about power. It's about anguish. Here it is, looking the other direction, because it's in a woods. You'd never know it from this. So civilized, but you turn, it's in a woods. The gymnasium, I just want to show you the way that they consolidate ancient Greek sculpture and a school for boys. And then here, north of the museum, they had to have a bit of everything. They had the Cranbrook School for boys, Kingswood for girls, the Brooklyn School for children, and then they had the Art Institute. They had an architecture school, and then they had this, the Academy of Science. A very small place of scientific research, but very, very beautiful and very restrained, with beautiful lawns around it, sculpture. But I show you this because my mother would take me there as a boy. And in these rooms, in these cabinets, were artifacts from 6 nations of the Grand River. The fact is, they have one of the most important artifacts of Iroquois in their collection. It's a true museum in the old sense of the word, but it is beautiful and respectful. Art everywhere. Now, this is a report carried out by William Fenton of the New York State Museum. That's another great place that collected our artifacts. Another place is the High Foundation in New York. But we're just touching on the highlights of collecting Iroquois. He came to Cranbrook and wrote a very famous essay about this. This is a condolence cane. The condolence cane of William Spragg. It's very old. Mr. Spragg sold it to the museum for $100 in about 1940. Now here we have the Museum of Science in Ottawa. This is what it used to look like before it moved. And these are the kinds of buildings we were living in at 6 Nations at the time. Yet we were being studied by all the world-famous ethnologists Here you saw this in the last lecture. The old chiefs with our wampum belts. This is how they would keep them, not in a museum. And now you see the Museum of Civilization by Doug Cardinal in Gatineau. And this is where they keep a lot of our things today, including the famous Hudui masks. Now, this was shocking to me. My chief carved these, and the museum has about 800 of them, but they are not on public display. They're kept in locked, fenced cages in the dark. Now, my chief said to me, listen, Bill, we're going to the museum because they keep our masks locked up because they're so afraid of them. They do have a life, but they obviously believe in the power because they keep them locked up. And they want me to feed them. Now, we have a ceremony where you feed the masks once a year. You feed them corn mush. And so Jake said to me, okay, meet me at the museum, meet my wife and I at the museum on such and such a morning when the museum's closed, and we will make the corn mush, and they will bring out the masks, and we will ceremonially feed them while I sing the songs. So here we are in the museum. I see myself as part of Doug Cardinal's coterie of colonization, but I'm now with the traditional chief, standing there as an assistant in the ceremony for the feeding of the Hudui masks. It was quite a two-row experience for me. And it humbled me, and it feeds the lectures I'm giving to you in this course. They're really lectures of compassion, not of conflict. And I experienced it in this way directly. It's an experience people can't take away because I experienced it. Then they took us out to a beautiful meal in a restaurant overlooking the Parliament buildings across the river in Gatineau. And they said to my chief, oh, look, what is that over there, Jake? He said, I don't know, never seen it. But it's the Parliament buildings. Haven't you seen them? No, it's not our government. But he was doing psychodrama. He said, that's not in our culture and it's not my country. Right there, our guest. Is he insulting them? Yes and no. You know, he's doing his objection, but he's doing it with grace. And he's having the meal with them. Then we go home. And we go home to this. Our women at that time wore gingham cotton, and the children as well. We are inheritors of the British Victorian arts and crafts movement, as all of Canada was at that time. And then here we have the tools of the archaeologists: the brushes, the pens, the tape measures, the trowel. And I told you I was given one of these as a gift by the archaeologists. So look at this. On one hand, I'm giving a gift of a trowel. On the other hand, I'm with the Hudui mask. Put that together and think of the movie, The New World. A native woman, an English man, and a newborn son in England. The New World. So I guess I have to say I am in the New World, and so are you. And it behooves us to pick up the beautiful heritage that our ancestors have established. Don't throw them out. Now this is, at Six Nations of the Grand River, the Iroquois shop. This is the finest shop in the world for Iroquoian books, artwork, crafts. I bought this shirt there. You see the ribbon shirt. They have everything here. I've been visiting this periodically for many years. They used to be in a log cabin in the woods, and they built a new log cabin on the highway. They are enormously popular. They do a mail order business, which is mind-boggling. So here we are, preserving our own culture now. I've shown you how The settlers preserve our culture, and I'm showing you how we do it. We do it by feeding the Hidui mess and running this beautiful business, Era Crafts. Settled in this painting by Robert Griffin. Here you see native men in the forest without guns. They have their blowpipe on one side and their bow and arrow on the other, in leggings and breechcloths. And then here from the air, you see the center and heart and soul of our community at Six Nations. What does that look like? It looks like a small town somewhere. And it is, in fact, except that it's native. And you would only know it if you drove down the main street, which is going up to the left. That's the main street. And then off to the left of that, you see some blue roofs. That is our business center, built in a modern vernacular by the architect Brian Rice as a collision of long houses. And then opposite, on the other side of the road, you see a horseshoe-shaped building. That is our shopping center. We have a shopping center. All around it, you see we have a housing development. We have various businesses and institutions of the reserve, including our land office, our it's called the Iroquois Lodge for the elderly. We have a place for abused women, which is something we all have to deal with on and off reserve. This is what it looks like. It doesn't look any different than so many things, but it is, because it's native. And you know that when you're on these roads, you are in native territory. You drive off them onto the county roads, you are in the settler territory. It's a very interesting thing. And then here's one of our great chiefs, Arnie General, Onondaga. He looks so serious here because he's not serious. He's a complete joker. And when Arnie is around, he gives out edicts which are kind of intimidating. And then here's my dear friend, Ken Miracle. He is our official wampum maker at Six Nations, and this is some of his work. He's very famous now, although he started out his life as a tool and die maker in Hamilton. In his retirement, he became our wampum maker. And then here is my teacher with a bowl doing a smudge, Dr. Apila, Colorado. Again, two worlds, native and non-native. She is the first native person to receive a PhD from a university in the United States, Brandeis University and Harvard. And then here is our great world ambassador, our ambassador to the United Nations, Oren Lyons. He's a beautiful spokesperson. And then this is one of our singers from Tyendinaga. Oh, his name eludes me right now. But he's a wonderful singer, and he's a very powerful Mohawk presence when he's with an audience. And then another one of our great elders and teachers, Tom Porter, who as a young Mohawk boy, knew he would one day be an elder, and now he is. He keeps our territory in upstate New York. I showed you the location of it. And then we have this painting, but notice my title, Returning and Revolved in the Great Cycles of Original Creation. In other words, we're coming and going from the sky world to the back of the turtle. Those are our two, and returned to the star field of the Milky Way. That is our cosmology right there in that instant, moving back and forth between a world above, a world below, and then finally up into the stars. That is the journey of every single human being on this planet Earth. And this is the story we could tell each other. And it would be very healing and very humbling. And then at Six Nations, you see to the right at Brantford, the powerful sculpture I showed you at the last lecture. Oops, I lost my 2-row. It's okay. This is Joseph Brant in the heart of Brantford. And on the left is a monument we just erected about maybe 7 years ago, where some of the women got together and said, we need a monument to teach our children about our original land grant. And there it is, we'll carve it in black granite, and they'll never be able to take it away. And up above is a shadowy portrait of Joseph Brant. And then down below is a wampum belt in white. That is a wampum belt of the friendship between native and settlers. So we honor that on our reserve, our friendship, 2-row, our territory given to us by Great Britain, and the man who is like 2 arrows bound together, Joseph Brant. See how it's working? Now here's another stunning thing here in Ontario, at Peterborough, Ontario, near Rice Lake, where our former director, Rick Holdenby, has a cottage. This is a stone face with petroglyphs on it, which is one of the most incredible petroglyph sites in the world. When they discovered it, again in the 1940s, it was covered with moss because Native people kept it covered and hidden. But then with ethnology, they wanted to uncover it, so they took off the moss and started studying these figures. Then, in time, they built a glass structure over it to protect it. That is how the colonizer protects things. We use moss, they use glass and steel. And it's really a very clumsy glass and steel structure, and it echoes. But the weather can't touch these, and so that's what we have today. Now we're going to shift, if we can, to. I'm showing you how we share our culture, settler and native, and how long the heritage is. Now, what about our architecture? What about it? Does it have a heritage of sharing? Well, I showed you the Georgian architecture is definitely sharing. But the Americans never built a Georgian house in the spirit of the Longhouse. Only the British did it. And that's because the Americans basically do not like anyone unlike the original white settlers, native or black or whatever. They don't like difference. It seems to be a hallmark of their country, and we did have some incredible Americans though who did understand. Now, this is a picture of Frank Lloyd Wright's model of what he called Broadacre City, a vision of how we can live together on this vast land, where everyone would be assigned a homestead with 1 acre at least, and that there would be a cathedral in it that would be for 1,000 people and accommodate 12 different religions, but people all met in one church. Around the perimeter are the individual chapels, and you come out of your chapel and go to the center, where you all join together in a circle as one. Absolutely visionary. When the drawings are still available. They're at the Museum of Modern Art now. But when you see that drawing and you see his notes, your mouth has to drop open. Now, there are many aspects to this Broadacre City. One of them, which interests me very much, there is a stadium up in the upper right corner. It's a circular stadium, but there's a very small ring of seats. But basically, it's a grand open space for events. He didn't talk about what the events would be, but we would recognize this in the Native tradition as a gathering circle, because what game is played there? There's no game. It's just a big open lawn. But if you look, you will see next to it is a very tall spire, which Wright was wont to use in his buildings. This tall spire is different. It is the tallest thing in the Broadacre town. And how does he address it? This is from his own book, Broadacre City. Number 31 is the circus. He calls that circle a circus. Think about it. What is a circus? And what happens in a circus? However, next to it is number 31A. This is breathtaking. A totem and a beacon to the lost tribes of a continent. We will remember. Sorry, I was so moved by this, and I have pointed this out to Wright scholars, including the scholar Neil Levine, who's written a beautiful book on Wright. He's a very intelligent scholar from Princeton, who studied with Vincent Scully. It just didn't ring a bell with him. It just didn't, because he is one of these colonizers. He is in charge of the academy. And he's a very condescending person. I mean, I like him very much. I've met him at various events, and I like him because I like his work. But he looks down, except, very interestingly, his wife loves Native people. Susan Jacobs, and his wife grew up in a Frank Lloyd Wright house, a very famous one called the Jacobs Hemicycle. One of her best friends, she lived at Taliesin, his Frank Lloyd Wright school in Arizona for many years. One of her friends passed on there, and they had a native ritual in Wright's Taliesin for his death. So just think about this, going back and forth, back and forth. Here you see Wright sitting on the model in 1940. And there you see in red where the totem and beacon are. You see it's World War II. And then down at the right, you see a nice clear picture of the circus and a nice clear picture of this tower. And then you see a picture here, which should remind you, the CN Tower. Here is the CN Tower at a Nuit Blanche event where an artist placed floodlights all around the waterfront of Toronto, and there was a control panel that you could take time at, let's say maybe a minute, and you can control those lights. So everyone had a chance to shh. And what is that? Well, I named it a totem and a beacon to the lost tribes. I call it a totem and a beacon to the ancestors. Now, what is this? This is a prayer stick from Bhutan. Doesn't that look like the CN Tower? Well, of course it does. And the prayers are held in the disc down from the tip, not at the tip, because you want to honor the Creator. Now, I have lectured on this numerous times, and to capture people's imagination about what it means is a very difficult task. Now, here's another thing that I discovered. We're talking again about two cultures working together. Now I'm talking about how our culture here in Canada is working together with Native culture. Unbeknownst to us, this is the skyline of Toronto, the rather core of the tall buildings. There have been desecrated by numerous condominium buildings now. But this was taken before all the development, and you can see that there are buildings, and this is the only city in the world that I've been able to see has buildings of these colors. We have a black building, we have a white building, we have a red building, we have a yellow building. And in the middle we have silver covenant changed. This is a British colonial city built on native land. In the native medicine circle, the red is in the east, the place of the children. The black is in the west, place of the ancestors. The white, us, is in the north, and the yellow is in the south. All hovering around the common agreement, the silver covenant chain. That's in my imagination. Now, this is a quote from the Sufi poet, because I'm showing you the star field, I'm showing you the addressing of it. He said in 1200, when the stars revolve around the North Star, they are longing for our growing consciousness. And that's what this lecture is about. Your consciousness and the growing of it. My response to seeing Toronto in this way, I had to, for my doctoral dissertation, create a response to the gift I was given. I have a duty now to take what I saw and turn it into something significant. And I created it, I called it the First Nations Grove. And it's on a piece of beach in the last couple of weeks. It's a site of disrespect of social distancing. Thousands of kids have gone down there and having parties. And in a way, I look at it, I said, this is native ground. They should be free to do this, I guess. On one hand, it's a very stupid thing to do, but it's right on the ground that I chose as the First Nations Grove. And I created a foundation. This is our brochure for the foundation. Toronto, Beacon to the Ancestors. The return of Native peoples to their hosting duties. And that's what it looks like. It's a poplar grove. It's all poplar trees. And they grew very fast. They're very sturdy. They're very resistant to pollution. And here they are, mystical. And from a distance, you can see the city of Toronto skyline from that grove. Here's what I proposed. A central lodge around a cosmic tree. Without going into too much detail, I'd be happy to do that in another context, but there are two longhouses, one north-south, one east-west. I've explained why they're north-south, why they're east-west, and they're arranged in the cardinal directions, northeast, south, and west. And you approach the central lodge on a pathway which has a fire on it, and the fire is where Native people will meet people in their ancestry and offer them the 3 bear words, and then invite them into the lodge. The lodge would have great epic models of the city of Toronto through 20,000 years. Before there was anything here, it was white pine, and then the modern city, and then the city after it's flooded and becomes simple spires in the water. That's the longhouse I designed. And at the top is what they call the dish with 1 spoon. This is the agreement between all Native people that we will all eat from 1 dish with 1 spoon. We're not going to say it's contaminated. You eat from my spoon, then you eat from the same spoon. Dish with 1 spoon. These great towers, they're lightning rods. And whether you've seen the CN Tower or this is the Burj Dubai, when it's struck by lightning, it's absolutely stunning because of the power of that lightning. You see our great tree of peace in the middle, and then on the right, what do you see but Frank Lloyd Wright's mile-high skyscraper? I just ask you to think about that. And then here, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Dalondo, the place of the great fallen log. This is the place where we greet each other. I found this stunning. The Dalai Lama out west receiving the ribbons of the four directions from one of the chiefs. Honor, honor, honor. We need more of this. And here is the great white pine fallen in the forest. I've explained to you how it becomes an obstacle and a landmark, and how at the top of our tree is the eagle. So that's where I want to leave this lecture, just to show you the profound conversation between cultures that takes place down through the years right here in North America, and that is virtually ignored by anyone telling the history. I should write the book. I probably will, because I thought when people heard about this, they would take it up immediately. But no, it's too much. It's too much for them. Most people would rather be in amnesia rather than facing the reality. It's too hard. This is the flag we fly at places like Oka. I hate this flag, but it's the flag of the Mohawk warriors. It means we're coming and we are armed. It's a frightening flag. And this innocent child climbing on the upturned roots of the great white pine, our future. Okay, thank you very much.